also.
Right.
And tell us about that period of time, and obviously the advantage that you had, because HCL also decided to follow you, right, and set up HCL Americas at the same time. So was it your presence that prompted the decision, or was it?
I wish I could take that credit, but that was not the case. I was a happy coincidence. HCL had a scheme at that point in time where they actually allowed some of their executives after 5 years actually, mostly, to take a study break. And the sabbatical was really that they didn't pay any tuition fee or anything like that. It was just that a job was secured for you. That was the only thing that they really did. But it did help in the application process, etc. So I actually applied after 3 years. I went up to my HR department and I said, I'm an engineer, and for me to get to understand a little more knowledge about business, it's good for me to get an MBA. They were very supportive of this thing, and I actually went to the US in '88. And as I was in the US, HCL decided, while I was still there, that they wanted to enter the US market. They had done some, again, it was still the hardware days, they'd made some early innovations in the hardware business. They thought that with that innovation, which nobody else offered at that point in time, rightly so, there was a big market in the US, so they wanted to start the US market. And so it just was a happy coincidence for me to, at that point in time, to end up being with HCL America, or start HCL America, and get onto that journey. Of my own accord, I really never had any feeling or desire to be or to go to the US. There was a hankering amongst many of our other colleagues. Right after BTech, they would all be writing their GREs or GMATs to go to the US. I didn't have any of that. It just kind of fell into my lap that I was going to go to an MBA and come back. But because HCL was going to be there, I kind of stayed back.
So that's where you also had the seeds of the second aspect about startups, which is understanding a market, researching, where to go and what to do. Because when you are doing your MBA and HCL wanted to come in there, you're actually able to contribute towards a lot of the initial research, right, towards HCL's entry strategy into the US. Am I right?
Yeah,
I think so that helped tremendously in terms of a new industry, new market completely, and as an MBA student applying the knowledge directly on a day-to-day basis. That would have been a phenomenal experience.
It was, and I think one of the things was that the benefit of being a student was that I was actually, my label was that of a student, so a very innocuous label. So I could actually do any kind of comparative research. I could go to any enterprise, ask them any kind of a question under the garb of university research, and they were very open with information. They were not guarded with it. And that information and research was very, very helpful. Because those were the days, again, if you remember, were the days of the Raj. The funds were very difficult to come by. We had an RBI sanction of only $5 million. So with very little funds, of the $5 million, we contacted or contracted with McKinsey. McKinsey charged $1.5 million to do an entry strategy for us. The guy who did the strategy, Anil Kumar, who's my neighbor in California, he got infamous because of the Rajaratnam and Rajat Gupta case. Some of you may have followed that. But he was our account partner at that point in time. So they did the whole strategy for us. Unbeknownst to us, when we went to the US at that point in time, we did not understand the US market very well from the dynamics that operated in the US market. So while we got there, we got going with it, but we realized that the hardware business is a very different cup of tea. I mean, you spent years in Dell, you know that, Ajay, that the hardware business is very brutal, goes through a very quick obsolescence cycles. The channels to sell hardware are very, very different than the channels that we were used to, which was largely direct channels at that point in time. So it was a lesson learned, but not to be beaten down. And I think Manhor said earlier on, he quoted Muhammad Ali to say, never give up and continue to strive on. And that was one of the things we said, okay, what is it? When we were down to the last $1 million, we sat down, we looked at our employees, they all had hope in their eyes, they all had this can-do attitude, and we said we can't give up, we've got to do something else. And we realized that the one thing that we had been doing all along was that we had been doing a lot of software. And so we said, forget the hardware business, let's get into the software business, we understand that business. And we did not know, actually speaking at that point in time, that we were actually catching a wave. The whole software outsourcing wave was just starting in the late 80s, early 90s. And we kind of rode together with that wave.
You learned one more principle of a startup, pivot your business.
Yes.
Right, so starting off, getting into hardware, running out of money with whatever funding that you had available, pivot your business and ride the wave in terms of what you could possibly do with the resources that you have out there.
Yeah, and I think really the ability to take a quick decision and to, as they use the frame in the US, to be able to turn on a dime, really that was one thing that we did not wait very long. We very quickly, it was just one meeting. We got everybody in a town hall meeting like this. We had about 150 employees at that point in time, and we talked to them and then we said, this is what we want to do, and we got a resounding yes from everybody and said, yes, we are all behind you, and we changed the business plan and continued on from there. So it was a very, I think a very fortuitous that we actually took that decision.
I think clearly the atmosphere that you had in HCL, the kind of the supportive atmosphere you're telling me about, I'm sure that's been the genesis of what would have really led to your own style and managing people, right? And obviously that's been the cause of a continual relationship with a lot of the core people that you've had with you all of these years, isn't it?
Yeah, I think this is one thing that we learned, that oftentimes people come and ask me, and I think this is a question that gets questioned even in Silicon Valley today. I spent 20 years in the Valley, and now I live in Singapore for the last 5 years. But the Indian diaspora occupies a disproportionate amount of startups, so whether it's in the US, in Singapore, or anywhere else besides India. And I use this analogy. Some of you are aware, the younger people in the crowd may not be aware, but I do see some more people like with grey hair, they'll be able to relate. I say Indians make very good entrepreneurs, and the reason for that is the ingredients, some of the ingredients, not to replicate what Manohar said, what do you have to do? You have very little information. B, you're relying upon your team to make a venture successful. And C, you do not have a choice but to make it successful. We as Indians come from an institution called arranged marriage. Right? We have very little information. We depend on our parents to make the right choice, and our divorce rates are very, very low compared to the Western world. So, we are used to that institution, so therefore we make very good entrepreneurs, and that's the spirit that we carried on, and I think that's something that, we fostered in terms of our team, everybody that works for us. Two things that we look for in a team when we look at that is we talk about, in this uncertain world, we say tolerance for ambiguity and tolerance for frustration. Because in a startup or in any business, even in a growing business, those are two things that are always plaguing you. And if you have a high tolerance for both ambiguity and frustration, then I think it helps you get going every day.
Well, you forgot one more interesting experience that Indians have, right? Indians learn to drive in traffic, which Americans and Singaporeans and all of them don't need to face. So those two qualities that you're talking about, you imbibe them so very well, right, when you take your car out every day. So I'm sure that helps tremendously at our side as it is.
Well, I got to tell you one thing, I did just as a side anecdotal thing, that I was once bringing a team from Fisher into India, and the team that I had, actually, there were some Americans and there were a couple of British guys who were coming for the first time. So the American is telling the British guy and saying that, hey, we drive on this side of the road and you guys drive on that side of the road. But the Indians drive in the middle of the road. And surely at that point in time, we found our driver having negotiated, gone over the median on this side and this side. So when you talk about driving, yes, we can drive anywhere in any manner and shape and form.
Sure. And I know that you've had a small stint after you left HCL with Infogame, right, where you really helped them in terms of setting up their ODCs and stuff like that. But I think I'll come to what is obviously one of the most critical things that you really built in your life, right? Let me ask you. You referred to the $5 million and you referred to $1.5 million that went off into the consulting activity. Was that the motivator that when you set up TechSpan per se, your focus was providing consulting solutions, right, to organizations? Was that maybe a driving force that you said, hey, there is much more money that can be made here than...
Yeah, I think clearly that was definitely the genesis, and eventually we capitalized on that, and then we continue to do, TechSpan, Headstrong, and all our subsequent journeys. Our life has been that one on the consulting side. But I think it was a very happy, serendipitous move for us at that point in time from the hardware business to the software business. And clearly, as you can see, I just came from NASSCOM this morning, and NASSCOM, as many of you know,